Picture this. You're lying in bed at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you could survive financially if your car decided to transform into an expensive pile of metal tomorrow. Or maybe you're the type who breaks out in a cold sweat every time you hear a weird noise coming from your refrigerator, knowing that appliance repair bills have a magical ability to appear at the worst possible moments. Either way, you've probably asked yourself the same question that keeps millions of people awake at night. Exactly how much emergency cash do I actually need to have saved? Well, here's something that might shock you. The answer isn't what most financial experts have been telling you for decades, and the reality of what the average person actually has saved versus what they need might make you feel either incredibly relieved or completely terrified about your own situation. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time researching personal finance statistics and figuring out why most people's financial advice sounds great in theory, but falls apart the moment real life decides to throw a curveball. If you're someone who wants to understand what emergency fund numbers actually make sense instead of just following outdated rules that might not apply to your situation, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button if this helps you sleep better at night. Now, before we dive into the real numbers, let me tell you something that most financial advisors don't want you to know. They've been recommending the same emergency fund formula for over 30 years, regardless of whether you're a 22-year-old living with roommates or a 45-year-old supporting a family of 5. It's like prescribing the same medication for every patient who walks into a doctor's office. Sure, it might work for some people, but it's definitely not optimal for everyone. The traditional advice you've heard 1,000 times goes something like this. Save 3 to 6 months of living expenses in a readily accessible savings account. Boom. Problem solved. Pack it up, everyone. We figured out personal finance. Except here's the thing that makes this advice almost useless for most people. What exactly counts as living expenses? Are we talking about your current lifestyle, where you're ordering takeout 3 times a week and paying for 7 different streaming services? Or are we talking about bare bones survival mode, where you're eating rice and beans while canceling every subscription that isn't absolutely essential? This distinction matters more than you might think, because the difference between these two approaches could literally be thousands of dollars. And for someone who's already struggling to save any money at all, being told they need to save 6 months of their current spending might feel so overwhelming that they don't even bother starting. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that will probably surprise you. Recent research has discovered that having just $2,000 in emergency savings can be as powerful for your financial well-being as having $1 million in assets. I know that sounds absolutely insane, but let me explain why this makes perfect sense. Think about the last time you had an unexpected expense pop up. Maybe your phone screen cracked, or you needed new tires, or you had to take your pet to the vet for something that couldn't wait. How much stress did that cause you? Not just financial stress, but the mental energy you spent worrying about how you were going to pay for it, whether you should put it on a credit card or if you needed to ask family for help. Now imagine having $2,000 sitting in a savings account specifically for situations like this. Suddenly, that broken phone becomes an inconvenience instead of a financial crisis. Those new tires become a routine purchase instead of a reason to lose sleep. This is why even a relatively small emergency fund can have such a massive impact on your overall financial well-being and peace of mind. But let's get brutally honest about where most people actually stand with their emergency savings, because these numbers are going to either make you feel much better about your situation or serve as a serious wake-up call. According to recent surveys, only 44% of Americans could cover a $1,000 emergency using their savings. Let that sink in for a moment. We're not talking about covering 6 months of expenses. We're talking about a single unexpected bill that costs less than most people's monthly rent. It gets even more concerning when you look at the bigger picture. 42% of Americans don't have any emergency fund at all. $0 set aside for unexpected expenses, and among those who do have some emergency savings, the median amount is just $500. That's $500 to handle everything from car repairs to medical bills to job loss to appliance breakdowns. Meanwhile, financial experts are running around telling everyone they need to save tens of thousands of dollars for their emergency fund. Can you see the disconnect here? It's like telling someone who's never run a day in their life that they need to prepare for a marathon. The advice isn't wrong, but it's so far removed from their current reality that it becomes completely unhelpful. This is exactly why understanding what you actually need versus what the textbooks say you need becomes so important. Because here's something that might change how you think about emergency funds entirely. The amount you need depends heavily on your specific life circumstances, and those circumstances probably look nothing like the hypothetical person that generic financial advice is designed for. Are you single with no dependents, living in a relatively affordable area with a stable job? Your emergency fund needs are going to be completely different from someone who's self-employed, supporting a family, and living in an expensive city. Are you 25 years old with wealthy parents who could help in a genuine crisis? Your situation is vastly different from someone who's 45 with aging parents who might need financial assistance themselves. But most financial advice treats everyone exactly the same. Save 3 to 6 months of expenses, end of story. Except that's not how real life works, and it's definitely not how emergency fund planning should work either. Let me break down what emergency fund planning actually looks like when you factor in real-world variables instead of generic recommendations. If you have no children, no one depending on you financially, and a job that would be relatively easy to replace, you can probably get away with 3 months of essential expenses. Notice I said essential expenses, not your current spending. We're talking about rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, insurance, and minimum debt payments. Not your gym membership, Netflix subscription, and weekly dinner dates. If your essential monthly expenses are $2,000, you're looking at $6,000 for a 3-month emergency fund. Still a significant amount, but much more manageable than trying to save for 6 months of your current lifestyle that might include a lot of unnecessary spending. Now, if you have a family depending on you, or your income fluctuates because you're self-employed or work in a seasonal industry, or you have a specialized job that might take longer to replace, you're probably looking at 6 to 9 months of essential expenses. And if you earn more than $100,000 annually, you might need even more than that because higher income jobs often take longer to replace and your essential expenses are probably higher as well. But here's something that's going to challenge everything you think you know about emergency fund planning. Starting with any amount, even if it's just $500, provides real financial benefits that go far beyond the dollar amount itself. That $500 represents something much more valuable than its face value. It represents options. It represents the ability to handle small emergencies without going into debt. It represents not having to choose between paying your electric bill and fixing your car when something breaks. And psychologically, it represents proof that you can save money, which builds the confidence and momentum you need to save even more. This is why the all or nothing approach to emergency fund advice is so destructive. When people hear they need to save $15,000 before they have a proper emergency fund, many of them never start at all. They figure if they can't do it perfectly, why bother doing it at all? It's like saying you shouldn't exercise unless you can run a 5-minute mile. Completely counterproductive. The truth is, your emergency fund should grow with you. Start with whatever you can manage, even if it's just $25 a week. That might sound laughably small, but $25 a week adds up to $1,300 in a year, and $1,300 can handle a surprising number of life's unexpected curveballs. But here's where most people sabotage their own emergency fund efforts, and it's something that drives me absolutely crazy. They save up a few $100s, then something happens that requires exactly that amount, and instead of feeling grateful that they had the money available, they get discouraged and stop saving. They think their emergency fund failed because they had to use it. Listen, your emergency fund didn't fail. It succeeded spectacularly. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. The whole point of having emergency money is to use it during emergencies. That's not a failure of the system. That's the system working perfectly. The mistake is not immediately starting to rebuild it afterward. Think of your emergency fund like insurance. You don't get mad at your car insurance for covering accident repairs. You don't feel like your health insurance failed because you had to use it for medical bills. Your emergency fund is financial insurance, and using it when you need it is exactly what it's designed for. Now, let's talk about something that might completely change how you think about where to keep your emergency money, because the standard advice here is also pretty questionable. Most experts tell you to keep your entire emergency fund in a savings account, earning practically nothing in interest. The logic is that you need immediate access to the money, so it has to be completely liquid. But this approach ignores the reality of how emergencies actually work in the modern world. Most true emergencies can be handled with a credit card initially, giving you at least 30 days to access your money. Very few emergencies require you to show up somewhere with cash in hand within 24 hours. This means you might be able to keep part of your emergency fund in slightly higher yielding investments that can be accessed within a few days, rather than losing money to inflation in a savings account that pays virtually nothing. I'm not talking about putting your emergency money in the stock market. I'm talking about money market accounts, short-term CDS, or high-yield savings accounts that might require a day or two to transfer funds. The key is having some portion immediately accessible and some portion that takes a few days to access but earns better returns. Maybe keep 1 month of expenses in checking or regular savings for immediate needs, and the rest in accounts that pay higher interest but take slightly longer to access. Here's another factor that most emergency fund advice completely ignores, and it's something that could save you thousands of dollars. Your emergency fund needs change dramatically based on what other financial resources you have available. If you have a solid credit score and access to low interest credit options, you don't need as large an emergency fund as someone who would have to rely on high interest payday loans or credit cards. If you have valuable possessions you could sell quickly without significantly impacting your life, you don't need as large an emergency fund as someone who owns nothing of value. If you have family or friends who could help in a genuine crisis, your emergency fund requirements are different from someone who has no financial safety net beyond their own savings. This doesn't mean you should plan to burden other people or go into debt during emergencies. It means you can factor these backup options into your emergency planning so you're not over-saving in an account that earns nothing while you have high interest debt you should be paying off instead. Speaking of debt, here's a controversial opinion that might make some financial advisors uncomfortable. If you have high interest debt, especially credit card debt, you probably shouldn't be building a large emergency fund until you've paid it off. I know this goes against conventional wisdom, but think about it mathematically. If you're paying 20% interest on credit card debt while your emergency fund earns 1% in a savings account, you're losing 19% annually on that money. You're literally paying money to keep money in savings that you could use to eliminate debt that's charging you far more than your savings will ever earn. Now, I'm not saying you should have zero emergency savings while paying off debt. Having some buffer, even if it's just $500 to $1,000, makes sense so you don't have to add to your debt when small emergencies pop up. But building a 6-month emergency fund while carrying high interest debt is like trying to fill a bucket with a giant hole in the bottom. The smarter approach might be to build a small emergency buffer, aggressively pay off high interest debt, then build your full emergency fund once you're not hemorrhaging money to interest payments. This way, you're not working against yourself financially. But here's something that's going to blow your mind about emergency fund statistics. Despite all the advice about needing months of expenses saved, the average emergency that people actually face costs less than $2,000. Car repairs, appliance replacements, minor medical bills, home maintenance issues, most of the unexpected expenses that derail people's finances could be handled with a relatively modest emergency fund. The 6-month emergency fund isn't really about covering typical emergencies. It's about covering the big one: job loss, major illness, significant life changes that affect your ability to earn income. And while these situations absolutely happen and can be financially devastating, they're much less common than the smaller emergencies that people face regularly. This suggests that maybe we should think about emergency funds differently. Instead of one large fund designed to handle everything from a flat tire to unemployment, maybe it makes more sense to have different tiers of emergency money for different types of problems. A small fund for minor inconveniences like car troubles or broken appliances, a medium fund for bigger issues that don't threaten your income, and a larger fund specifically for income replacement during job loss or major life disruptions. This tiered approach might actually make more psychological and practical sense than trying to stuff everything into one massive savings goal. Consider this. If you know you have $2,000 set aside for car problems, home repairs, and medical copays, you can sleep better at night knowing that life's smaller curveballs won't derail your finances. Then, if you have another $5,000 specifically earmarked for bigger emergencies and maybe a third tier for true income replacement, you've created a much more strategic approach to financial preparedness. This also makes the saving process feel less overwhelming. Instead of staring at a goal of saving $20,000 for emergencies, you're working towards smaller, more achievable targets that provide real value along the way. Save your first $1,000 for minor emergencies, then work on your second tier, then your third. Each milestone actually improves your financial security instead of making you wait until you hit some arbitrary final number. Now, let's address something that makes emergency fund planning even more complicated in today's economy. The cost of everything has gone completely insane over the past few years. What used to be a $500 car repair is now a $1,000 car repair. What used to be a $100 medical bill is now a $300 medical bill. Groceries that cost $200 a month now cost $300 a month. This means that even if you calculated your emergency fund needs perfectly 2 years ago, you probably need to recalculate them now. And this is something that most people never think about. They save up their emergency fund once and then forget about it, not realizing that inflation is quietly making their safety net less safe every year. But here's where this gets really frustrating. While the cost of emergencies has increased dramatically, wages haven't kept pace for most people. And savings account interest rates, despite recent increases, still barely keep up with inflation. So you need more emergency money than before, but it's harder to save that money. And the money you do save loses purchasing power over time. This is why the old advice about keeping your entire emergency fund in a savings account makes even less sense now. You're fighting a losing battle against inflation while earning virtually nothing on money that took significant sacrifice to save in the first place. It's like watching your financial safety net slowly disintegrate while being told it's the responsible thing to do. Here's a reality check that might change how you approach emergency fund planning entirely. Most people will never experience the type of catastrophic emergency that requires 6 months of living expenses. Job loss happens, but unemployment benefits exist. Major illnesses happen, but insurance covers most costs for people who have it. Home disasters happen, but homeowners insurance handles the major expenses. The scenarios that actually require you to live off your emergency fund for months at a time are much rarer than the financial advice industry wants you to believe. And spending years of your life aggressively saving for these unlikely scenarios while carrying debt or missing investment opportunities might actually make you worse off financially in the long run. This doesn't mean you shouldn't prepare for worst case scenarios. It means you should prepare proportionally based on the likelihood of those scenarios actually happening to you. If you're in a stable industry with good job security, health insurance, and other safety nets, your emergency fund needs are different from someone who's self-employed in a volatile industry with no benefits. But here's something that will make you question everything about traditional emergency fund advice. The people giving this advice often have multiple income streams, significant assets, and financial resources that make their own emergency fund requirements completely different from yours. It's like taking driving advice from someone who has a personal chauffeur. So there you have it. Your emergency fund doesn't need to be some massive fortress of cash that takes decades to build. Start with what you can manage, factor in your actual life circumstances instead of following cookie cutter advice, and remember that even $2,000 can completely change your relationship with financial stress. Stop letting perfect be the enemy of good and start building your safety net today. Your future self will thank you when life inevitably decides to get expensive at the worst possible moment.